So we are not starting on Indian time?
Yes, Rohit.
Yes. Oh.
Mihir speaking.
Hello,
Mihir.
Yeah, who is speaking?
Mihir.
Oh, hi, how are you? I think I saw you last in France, am I right?
Okay, nice.
And you were Puvita's thesis advisor, am I right?
Yeah, you are right. Yeah.
Are you from Bengal?
Yes, I am.
Actually, I have a complaint against Bengalis.
Oh.
That I have a lot of Bengali friends on Facebook, but when they post something, then they use the Bengali script. Now, the thing is, Bengali and Gujarati have a lot of words in common, and Bengali also is words in common. So I could understand what they are posting, but I don't know the script. So I sometimes wish they would also have a transliteration in Devanagari, the common Devanagari. And then I think that would have two advantages. More people could read it, and more people could learn some Bengali.
Oh, okay. Right? I didn't know about it, actually. Yeah.
Of course, the Bengali script is very beautiful, but still, unreadable and beautiful is no use.
Does it have vowels?
But yeah, vowels. Yeah. Right. Oh, yeah. Shankar here.
Yeah.
Is it Shankar? Yeah. Okay, good.
Yeah.
So nice meeting.
Because I've learned that alphabets like the Arabic alphabet and the original Canaanite alphabet do not have vowels, and so they're called consonantal alphabets.
Yeah. Right.
Oh.
So I don't hear Rohit properly. What is happening? I don't know. Maybe it is fault on my side.
Can you hear me?
I can actually. I'm not quite sure what's happening. Maybe
there's some problem in
maybe. I'm not quite sure because I can hear him. There is no problem I'm encountering.
We hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you as well. Yeah, that is true as well. Can you hear me, sir?
Let me tell you a story about a small boy who went to a movie. And there was a small boy who went to a movie, and a huge fat man came and sat down in front of him, and the boy could not see the movie. So he tapped the fat man on the shoulder and said, "Sir, I can't see the movie." The fat man said, "Don't worry about it. Just laugh when I do."
Okay.
So that's behaviorism for you.
Yeah.
I don't know if you people know, but my mother was a student at Shantiniketan for 1.5 years.
Oh, Shantiniketan, wow.
Yeah, and she actually met Tagore.
So she knew Bengali very well, I'm quite sure about it.
No, I don't think so. No.
Not really. Okay.
She must have known some, right? She must have known some.
Okay.
But Tagore didn't have a long chat with her. He only asked her if she would cook a Gujarati dinner for him.
Oh.
And I don't know if the dinner actually happened or not. But it was, I think he died in 1941, right?
Yes.
And she was there from 39 to 41. So she was there at the end of his life.
I don't know where is Amit. Maybe I can start because it's already time.
Yeah.
Can you hear now?
It's already.
I'm here. Yeah.
Yeah, you are here. Okay. Can you hear us now?
Better.
Okay. So I'm starting the. Okay. So it's welcome everyone. It's my great pleasure to welcome Professor Parikh in our webinar as a speaker. I'm quite sure that all of you know about him, but as a chair, I need to say a few words. Literally, I will say really a few words about him because already you know better than me about him. So he is a mathematician, logician, also a philosopher. He actually worked in many areas of logic, connecting computer science, philosophy, and mathematics. And he is currently in Brooklyn College at City University of New York. And among his many important works, I guess that the introduction of bounded arithmetic and the logic of games give us the opportunity to work on many areas and have new ideas to do work on logic. And he received many prizes. Among them is like William Lowell Putnam Mathematical Competition Prize for 3 consecutive years from 1955. And in 1954, he received Gibbs Prize. Today, he is going to give a talk on the Sorites paradox, fuzzy logic, and Wittgenstein's language game. I'm not sure whether I just pronounce it correctly or not. And I insist all of you, as usual, to ask questions anytime. I hope that Professor Parikh will be happy to give the answers of them. And it's over to you, Professor Parikh. Please continue.
Okay, thank you. All right, so this is the abstract, which many have seen. So my point is that the search for semantics or vagueness in the solution of Sorites paradox, these have really not been very successful. And the existing solutions are not quite adequate. I'll say something about them. But following Wittgenstein, we show that the notion of a successful language game works. So language games involving...
Sorry, can you please zoom in a bit so that everybody can read properly?
What would you like?
Will help. Full screen will help, I guess.
Full screen or zoom in, yeah? Like.
I think from
do
the full screen.
The plus on top of your screen, if you press that, it will zoom up.
Yeah.
You see that 125%? Yeah. If you can do one more plus, maybe.
Is that good or is that bad?
This is okay.
This is okay? All right.
Yes.
And Ram, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Very well. Yeah, no problem.
Rohit, one more plus would be probably appropriate.
Yeah.
Pardon me?
One more plus.
One more plus.
In the top line,
How is that?
there's minus and plus.
Yeah, that's bigger.
This is better.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks.
So language games involving words like small or red can be successful, and people can use these words to cooperate with others, right? I mean, when we talk to other people, we do use these words. And yet I shall argue, ultimately, these words don't have a meaning in the sense of a tight semantics. And because these terms don't have a meaning, the search for semantics and logic have not really been successful. I'll describe some of the events. So it's just that most of the time these games work. And it works to say the light is green and we can go, even though the color word green does not actually have semantics. So we have recently had a celebration of Holi, and I think pretty much everyone celebrates Holi, but I don't know how many people know the story about Holi. So it's about the boy Prahlad, who was a devotee of Vishnu, and his father Hiranyakashipu, who according to the scripture was an evil man, and Hiranyakashipu's sister was Holika, who was supposed to be immune to fire. So Hiranyakashipu did not like the fact that his son was a devotee of Vishnu, and he tried various methods to kill his own son. One of the methods was to have a funeral, to have a huge fire of burning wood, and Hiranyakashipu's sister Holika would take the boy Prahlad in her lap and sit on the fire. But Vishnu intervened, Holika was burned, and Prahlad remained alive, right? And so when we celebrate Holi, what we are celebrating is the fact that Prahlad survived. Of course, Holika might not have done anything wrong. She was just listening to her brother, and so it was too bad that she died. But in any case, she did listen to her brother and she died. Now, so Hiranyakashipu did not give up, and he tried another method to kill his own son. And the method was have a pillar heated very, very hot, and then he asked his son to embrace that pillar. Now, Hiranyakashipu considered himself invulnerable to death, and he prayed to the god Brahma, and he said, "Grant me that I not die within any residence or outside any residence, during the daytime or at night, nor on the ground or in the sky. Grant that my death not be brought about by any being other than those created by you, nor by any weapon, nor by any human being or animal." He had earlier asked Brahma to make him immortal. And Brahma said, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that, but ask me for something else. So he asked for this. And so Hiranyakashipu well believed that he had blocked all possible methods of death. However, as Prahlad approached the pillar, the hot pillar, the pillar burst, and a creature that was half man, half lion came out and grabbed Hiranyakashipu to the doorstep, so that he was neither inside nor outside. It was dusk, and he killed Hiranyakashipu with his claws. So that creature, Nasiyan, fulfilled all the conditions that he had imposed, and nonetheless Hiranyakashipu was dead. Now, Narsiya is considered one of the incarnations of Vishnu, and many people, especially in South India, are called Narsimha. That's after that story. So evidently Hiranyakashipu did not realize that with ambiguous AB, a conjunction not A and not B could be true, even though A or B is also true. So in propositional calculus, these two are incompatible and only one of them can be true. But if A and B are ambiguous, then it's possible for both of them to be true. So he was not killed indoors and he was not outdoors, even though he was killed either indoor or outdoors. So Michael Dummett discusses this point, and he says, Dummett says, but now consider a vague statement. For instance, that is orange. If the object pointed to is definitely orange, then of course the statement will be definitely true. If it's definitely some other color, then the statement will be definitely false. But the object may be a borderline case, like dusk, which is neither day nor night. And the statement will be neither definitely true nor definitely false. The disjunctive statement that is either orange or red will be definitely true, even though neither of its disjunctives. So Dummett, who probably did not know about Hiranyakashipu, nonetheless endorses this story. So here's the table of contents: background, logical issues, vagueness in real life, dealing with non-transitivity, operational semantics, and references. So the Megarian philosopher Eubulides, 4th century BC, is usually credited with the first formulation of the following puzzle. One grain of wheat does not make a heap. If n grains do not make a heap, then n plus 1 grains do not make a heap, and therefore 1 million grains do not make a heap. This inductive argument, which requires predicate calculus, can be replaced by a large number of applications of modus ponens. 1 grain of wheat does not make a heap. If 1 grain then doesn't, then 2 don't. If 2 don't, then 3 don't, and so on and so forth. So 1 million grains don't make a heap. So we have replaced an argument in the first order logic by a long argument in propositional calculus. So since Soros is the Greek word for heap, this puzzle is often known as the Sorites paradox. And 2 to 4 replace the inductive steps. The inductive step is in first order logic, and 2 to 4 are a very large number of steps in propositional logic. Now, there is a similar Indian story about a woman who cured her husband of his opium addiction. One second. I lost that. Yeah, okay. So she weighed during a certain period in Indian history, the Rajputs used opium quite a lot in order to be brave during battle. So this man was a Rajput, her husband, and he was addicted to opium. And so his wife wanted to cure him of his opium addiction. She weighed his usual opium ration against a ball of wooden thread. And then every day she cut off about an inch or so of ball, and she weighed his opium ration against the reduced ball. So the husband did not notice any difference from one day to the next, but over time, the ball came empty and the husband was cured. Now, this story must be recent, as opium was only introduced in India by the Mughals in the 17th century. And now the person from whom I learned this story is a Gujarati writer called Jabir Chand Meghani. He's well worth reading. Some people think of him as a who was the one who wrote Three Musketeers, the French writer.
Alexandre Dumas.
Pardon me?
Alexandre Dumas.
So he used to be called the Indian Alexander Dumas, right? Because he also wrote a lot about this kind of thing. And in this particular story, the husband is not, we don't see that the husband was a warrior, but in fact, we know that he was. So one way to deal with the Sorites paradox is epistemic. So namely, there is an n for which n grains do not make a heap, but then n plus 1 does. But we don't know which n it is. We'll say that a statement is super true if it's true regardless of which n it is, and it's super false if it's false regardless of which n it is. So in that case, the statement, there is an n such that n is not a heap and n plus 1 is a heap. This statement is super true, regardless of which value of n we choose, but we are unable to give an explicit n because we don't know. This is the line followed by Kit Fine, a professor at NYU, whom I've known, and I can tell you exactly how long I've known him. I've known him since 1974, because in 74, both Kit Fine and I were visiting Stanford, and my daughter Uma was a baby. My daughter is now 47, so I have known Kit Fine for 47 years. So he says in this section, we'll argue for the super truth theory that a vague sentence is true if it's true for all admissible and complete specifications. So what is an admissible and complete specification? It means that you actually state which n it is, or which hn is false and hn plus 1 is true. So an intentional version of the story is that a sentence is true if it's true for all ways of making it completely precise. As such, it's a sort of principle of non-pedantry. Truth is secure if it does not turn upon what one needs. So Fine manages to save a great deal of classical logic and our intuitions this way. In other words, he shows that his theory satisfies classical logic. So suppose there is a doubt whether a certain patch is pink or red. Then according to him, it's not super true that it's pink. It's not super true that it's red, but it's true that it's either pink or red. For regardless of where we draw the boundary, it'll be one or the other. And it is false that it's both pink and red, for no path to a complete specification will render it both. So Kit Fine does solve this problem to a certain extent. Okay, now there is Lotfi Zadeh, who has a couple of fans in this meeting. So he addresses this problem by resorting to truth values properly between 0 and 1. So what he says is, more often than not, the classes of objects encountered in the real physical world do not have a precisely defined criteria of membership. For example, the class of animals clearly includes dogs, horses, birds, etc. as its members, and clearly excludes such objects as rocks, fluids, and plants. But what about starfish and bacteria? They have an ambiguous status. The same kind of ambiguity arises in the case of a number such as 10, where we are talking about all real numbers which are much greater than 1. Of course, 10 is greater than 1, but is it much greater than 1? So Zadeh says that there is yes and there is no, and then there is the ambiguous class in between. And so clearly the class of all real numbers which are much greater than 1, or the class of beautiful women, or the class of tall men, they do not constitute classes or sets in the usual mathematical sense of these terms. Yet the fact remains that such imprecisely defined classes play an important role in human thinking, particularly in the domain of pattern recognition, communication of information, and abstraction. So here is a story about my grandson, Shiva, who is now 4.5 years old. But when he asked me this question, he was maybe 3. So he said to me, "Grandpa, why are you my grandpa?" It's interesting that children of that age already become interested in philosophical questions. So I said, I'm your grandpa because your father is my son. And Shiva said, no, he isn't. And the reason for that is that his father is taller than I am. And in Shiva's metaphysics, children are shorter than their parents. But then he decided to change his tune. And the next time I met him, he started calling me Dad's dad. So children do have a metaphysics. And it's just that we all live in life using counterfactuals and conditionals because there are only a few facts, and then we add other facts using counterfactuals. And children, of course, use different counterfactuals. And one of his was, every child is shorter than his parents. So Zadeh addresses his concerns by allowing fuzzy truth values in the real interval 0, 1. So let Rx indicate that the object X is red. If the fuzzy truth value of Rx is close to 0, then it means that X is pretty much not red. If it's close to 1, then X is pretty close to being red. And if you have a series of objects O1 to O100, and the R values gradually go up from 0 to 1, then one could say that the objects are gradually becoming more red, although you might not be able to distinguish O49 and O50. So Sorites paradox is defanged, so to say. But here is a problem. One would expect that even though fuzzy truth values lie between 0 and 1, they should at least be interpersonal. If I think that something is 0.3 red, then you should also think that it's 0.3 red. But in the test I administered in Sicily, which I'll come back to, I found that people gave very different fuzzy values to questions like, is a handkerchief an item of clothing, or is Sonia Gandhi in India? This was in Sicily, which is a part of Italy, and most of the students were Italian, and they had somewhat ambiguous feeling about Sonia Gandhi, who was, of course, by birth an Italian, married Rajiv Gandhi, and became an Indian citizen. So a handkerchief is made of cotton, but we do not usually wear it. So the first question, intuitions become conflicts. So these conflicts were resolved by different people in different ways, so there was no stable fuzzy value. In fact, I can imagine an Indian and an Italian quarreling, and one of them says Sonia Gandhi is an Indian, and the other one says Sonia Gandhi is Italian. Of course, if the Indian is a member of the BJP, then he might also say Sonia Gandhi is Italian. Anyway, we'll pass that one. So almost consistent theories, which were investigated by me in, I think, 1969 or something like that. So communication does not necessitate having the exact same truth value for opposition, and perhaps some agreement suffices and is useful. Now, let us define an inductive set of natural numbers to be a non-empty set, such that if n is in X, then so is n plus 1. So if the set has 5, it also has 6, 7, 8, and so on, so forth. And such a set will contain all large numbers, and if it contains 0, it will contain all numbers. On the other hand, let's define a bounded set X to be a set such that it is a bound M, such that every element of X is less than M. Now, clearly, a bounded set must be finite, whereas an inductive set will be infinite. So can a set be bounded and inductive? It seems not. But Yeserin Volpin, whom I knew quite well, he stayed in my house for more than a month, and probably Artemov also knew him.
Yes, I did.
Yes, you did, right. So he was a very interesting man. I'll just leave it at that. But he used to live in our attic, right? And just below the attic was our bedroom. And my wife often complained that Yeserin Volpin spent the whole night pacing back and forth in the attic. But I said, well, that's how it is. It's a logician, and logicians do these same things. So no one ceases to be a child in a single heartbeat. So H is the set of heartbeats in one childhood. If n is H, then so is n plus 1. Because you can't say he was a child 1 heartbeat ago and now he's not. And yet, assuming at most 100 heartbeats per minute, there are fewer than 10 million heartbeats before one reaches the age of 15. So H is bounded above by 10 million. It's both inductive and bounded, right? And Yesenin Volpin used this H or a similar H to offer a consistency proof for Zermelo-Fraenkel, but it's a complicated proof and I won't go into it. But isn't it inconsistent to speak of H at all? One could say, well, there is no such set, so why talk about it? So to make things easier, let's replace 10 million by 100. The inconsistency should be even more glaring. And let's X with a set of formula. H1 implies H2, H99 implies H100, and not H100. This set is inconsistent as the conclusion H100 can be derived from the first 100 formulas, contradicting the last one. But let T be some consistent theory, say T is piano arithmetic, and let T prime be T plus X. Now T prime is inconsistent because it includes X. But let A be some formula of number theory which doesn't involve the predicate H and whose proof in T prime takes less than 100 lines. So A is a formula proved in T prime which is inconsistent, but the proof of A is less than 100 lines. And then I claim that A is a theorem of PA. Why? The proof clearly includes less than 100 formulas of the form Hn implies Hn plus 1, because the proof is only 100 lines long. And hence, some formula of the form Hn implies Hn plus 1 is not in the proof. So to fix thought, suppose that H50 implies H51 is missing from the proof, then extend the usual interpretation of PA by interpreting HK as K less than 51. Now you can see that all the formulas which occur in the proof becomes true and A becomes the theorem of PA. So even though in the classical sense, there is no set like H and the properties of the putative H are inconsistent, it still works to reason with H. And only a dogmatic person will insist that there are no children or no heartbeats in childhood because the very notions are inconsistent. Now there is a well-known philosopher who has actually taken this hard line. So he wrote this book, Empty Ideas, A Critique of Analytic Philosophy, 2014. Now, I'm not quite sure that this is the paper in which he actually says that there are no such things as children and there are no heartbeats in childhood. But he did say this. And the person who introduced me to Peter Unger was Hilary Putnam, whom some of you may have heard of. Was a well-known philosopher at Harvard and brilliant man. Right? So he gave, Peter Unger had sent him 2 papers of himself, and Hilary Putnam gave me those 2 papers saying, Rohit, he's crazy, but you might like him. So I think the reputation that I like crazy people had spread. It was John Myhill who believed that I like crazy people. And so John Myhill was the person who sent Yesenin Volpin to stay with me. But Myhill also admired Yesenin Volpin because in a volume edited by Kino, Myhill, and Wesley, Yesenin Volpin's paper appears the very first paper in that volume. So Myhill knew there was something behind Volpin's ideas, but Myhill could not understand what it was. Okay, so here is an example from real life. So in the following example, the usefulness of communication with vague predicates consists of a saving of time. Anne and Bob teach at the same college. Anne teaches math and Bob teaches history. Right? Now, this example I chose from long time before the current belief that women should go into STEM fields. But so I already put Anne in STEM fields many, many years ago. So one day, Anne telephones Bob from school and she says, Anne, Bob, can you bring my topology book in? And Bob says, what does it look like? And Anne says, it's blue. This is the topology book, is the one by John Kelly, who was a professor at Berkeley and whom I met when I was teaching at Punjab University. So Anne says it's blue, and Bob says, okay. And she says, be sure to bring it. I'm going to lunch now, but I need it for class at 2 p.m. So this means that Bob cannot get in touch with Anne any further. She's going to lunch. And this was in a day when cell phones were not common. Now, it so happens that Anne and Bob have somewhat different notions of what the word blue means, that is, which things it applies to. And research shows that, in fact, men and women have different color perceptions, that women are able to make color distinctions which men cannot. And men are also able to describe a color. Of course, this ability of women is costly, because it means that if the two colors of a dress do not match, then women will be discontented, whereas men will say, oh, it's just fine. So research shows that there are differences between men and women, and also there are some tribes which are able to make extreme color distinctions. So that means that we all use the word blue, but we do not use it in the same way. And also we cannot use the word blue the same way today as we did yesterday, because we are relying on our perceptual apparatus, and the perceptual apparatus changes time to time.
Are these changes in perception innate, a la Chomsky, or acquired through?
Yeah. Well, they're partly biological, but partly also because depending on previous experience. Because if you look at Daniel Kahneman's his Nobel Prize lectures, right? So let me see if I can type it in here. In the website of the Nobel Prize, there is Kahneman's lecture, and I must say Kahneman is a beautiful speaker. His lecture is easily one of the best, very, very understandable. And what he does is he shows you a screen which is gray, and then he shows you a screen which is very red, and then he shows you the same screen again, and now the same screen which you thought was gray now looks green. So Kahneman gives you a vivid explanation of the fact that our color perception depends on our previous experience. And so there is no way in which we can use color words consistently.
Rohit, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So are there neuroscience-based explanations for these things as well, which could help in the logicization?
I don't think they can help, because the thing is that there are millions of colors, and I think human beings can only distinguish so many colors. That's one of the reasons why. Suppose on your wall there is a discoloration, right? Now, if the wall is green, you should be able to just go to the paint store and say, I need a color which matches my wall. But you can't do that because you don't remember how the wall looked. And so what you do is you take a color chip and show it to the paint store, and they match that color chip. Even then, it's not perfect. Was that your question?
No, that's true, but I was thinking that the brain must be following a certain decision algorithm, right?
Probably.
For resolving ambiguity.
Right.
And that might be evolutionary in some way.
Yes. But there is a lot of literature on this issue. Enormous amount of literature. So there is a book by Berlin and Kay. About color perception, which is a kind of a classic. And the person who gave it to me was my father-in-law, who was a kind of an expert in colors, right? And he died many years ago. So, in fact, I think he died in the 20th century. So that book must be more than 20 years old. So the set of books
excuse me.
Yes.
I had a small question regarding this exam. Actually, here I can see that
since you are asking a question and you are the boss, are you going to give me more time if I need?
Sure, I will. No problem.
Good. So you are the boss. Let me know.
Okay. No, I am not. You are the boss because you are giving the talk. Anyways, so I do have 225 books. Both are blue, according to Anne and Bob. But there is another constraint here, because I need to find the topology book. So how many topology book both, I mean, blue colored book, both by Anne and by Bob, kind of.
Right.
So,
okay. So, but Bob teaches English, so he has no idea what topology is. He just goes by the color.
Okay, okay, that is the assumption. Okay. So only color is okay.
Yeah, he's only told the color. Of course, once he pulls out the book, then he will see the name. But otherwise, he can't tell. He just knows the color because he teaches English.
Okay. I get it. Okay.
Right. So there are 225 books that both would call blue, 675 that neither would. But there are 25 books that Anne but not Bob would call blue, and 75 books that Bob but not Anne would call blue. And so these are in X intersect Y bar, and these are in X by. So if asked, they would disagree on 100 books. So now we can ask the question: when Anne said the book is blue, was she saying something true? Right? Because there is no interpersonal extension for the word blue. There is Bob's personal extension and there is Anne's personal extension, and they are not the same. So I'll assume that neither Anne nor Bob is aware of this. So Anne intends Bob to look through the set X, which is her blue, but he has his own notion, so he looks at Y. So here are the expected number of books that Bob would look at in the two cases. If Bob had no information about color, he would look at 500 books on the average. Because there are 1,000 books, he starts with number 1, number 2, and so on and so forth. If he's lucky, the first book will be a topology book, and unlucky, the last book. So the average is 500.5. However, in the actual case, since the books is in X with probability 0.9, it's also in Y. Since Bob actually looks in Y, if necessary, in the complement of Y, with probability 0.9, he only needs to look through Y, or at most 300 books yielding 150 average. So with probability 0.9, he will find it in Y and look through 150 books average. With probability 0.1, he'll not find it in Y, and then he will look through the rest of the other books, which is 350 other books. So you'll look at, on the average, 200 books, which is the average in this case. Now, actually, the 200, it won't be quite 200. It will be a little less because he will look, then if he doesn't look at in those books that he considers blue, he will look at those books that he considers bluish and say, well, maybe Anne thinks this is blue. So he will definitely not look at a book that's red, because he knows even Anne is not going to call this blue, but a book that's bluish or halfway between blue and green, he might say, well, maybe Anne thinks this is blue. So Bob is saved considerable labor. So instead of looking through 500 books, he looks through 200, but no proposition is conveyed by Anne to Bob. No proposition is conveyed by Anne to Bob, for they do not share a semantics. So this is the crucial thing, that people who do not share a semantics can still communicate. In fact, there are also extreme versions. For example, when my teenage son said to me that a movie was good, I would make sure not to see it. Because if a teenage boy thinks that a movie is good, probably there's a lot of fighting in it, and a lot of people are killed, and people flying through space and so on. My favorite was Amartya Sen, not Amartya Sen, Satyajit Ray. And okay, so here is Wittgenstein in his remarks on the foundations of mathematics. He says, what we call counting is an important part of life's activity. Counting and calculator are not, e.g., simply a pastime. And if you look at his philosophical investigations, which preceded the remarks on the foundations of mathematics. In fact, this book was not written by him. It was a book created by the editors from his papers. And here is a story about my friend Juliet Floyd. She was an expert on Wittgenstein. And I was sitting in a class by Paul Horwitz, who is a professor at NYU, on Wittgenstein. So I asked Horwich the following question. Horwich was teaching this course on Wittgenstein. So I asked Horwich the following question. I said that at the beginning of Remarks on the Foundations of Mathematics, Wittgenstein says, this book is dedicated to the glory of God, but in these times, this remark is likely to be misunderstood. Which means that Wittgenstein was a religious man, he was a theist, but in a different sense from the one in which many people conventionally are theists, right? So Wittgenstein says in the preface, this book is dedicated to the glory of God, but in these times, this remark is likely to be misunderstood. So I said to Horwich, Wittgenstein did not write this book. It was made up by the editors of his papers. So how is it that there is a preface in a book which he did not write? Horwich did not know the answer. So I called Juliet Floyd. Juliet Floyd, she had a baby and she was nursing the baby and she could not get up to consult any source. But she did not need to. She said to me, Wittgenstein was in the habit of writing prefaces for books that he did not write. And the editor simply took one of these prefaces, which were just lying around, and put it at the beginning of Remarks on the Foundations of Mathematics. So it shows her expertise, because a question which Horwich is a well-known philosopher, and he's also an expert in Wittgenstein, but he couldn't answer this question. Juliet Floyd answered it without having to get up. So coming back to Anne, we need not ask if Anne was speaking the truth when she said that the book was blue. There is indeed a 10% chance that Bob would disagree with her, but she did help Bob in his search for a book. And I think Wittgenstein would like this example, where a language game is successful, even though it's not underpinned by a solid notion of objective truth. And if you read the philosophical investigations, with care, you'll see again and again that Wittgenstein rejects this whole idea of semantics and logic. He doesn't say don't do logic. He said do logic. It's a game that you like to play. I don't have any problem with that. But don't think that you're achieving something. So vagueness and language games. Suppose that a community of people like us use words like blue, red, large, small, etc., and assign certain properties of purity of predicates. But on second thought, it turns out that these properties are inconsistent, and hence there are no such predicates. That's what Peter Unger said. He said there are no such predicates, and therefore there are no children. But does it follow that these people should constantly fall into confusion and be perpetually at war with each other? And the answer is not so, because we do use words like child, small, great, etc., with relative confidence, and most of the time we are understood. For we saw that Bob and Anne can communicate even though they assign different extensions to the word blue. And we saw that someone who believes 0 is small, if n is small and n plus 1 is not small, and 10 raised to 10 is not small, may succeed in making correct inferences, provided only that she does not perform deductions of more than 10 raised to 10 lines. So dealing with non-transitivity, this is joint work with Lakshmi Parikh and Von Pratt. Von Pratt is the founder of dynamic logic. And he is an emeritus professor at Stanford. But I met him when I was teaching at MIT. Lakshmi Parikh is a joint student of myself and Ramanujan. And She was his student when she was at TI5. Am I right, Ram? When was she your student?
Yes, in TI5.
TI5, right. And then later on, she went to NYU and she became my student at NYU. So she's a common student of ours, and she's now an IBM fellow. And I should say that this is a distinction because in the year that she became an IBM fellow, there were only 7 people in all who became IBM fellows. So it's not like you work for IBM and you're an IBM fellow, right? So I'll explain to you her part in this thing. So we define IXY to mean that X and Y are indiscriminable in some important ways. Then I is reflexive and symmetric, but may not be transitive. So you cannot distinguish X from X. And if you cannot distinguish X from Y, you cannot distinguish Y from X. So it's reflexive and symmetric, but it may not be transitive. So there can exist X, Y, Z, such that X and Y can't be distinguished, Y and Z can be distinguished, but X and Z can be. So I is not an equivalence relation. This fact is, of course, behind the Sorites paradox, and this can create a problem in practical methods, as when we are sorting socks after a wash and dry. So suppose we have 6 socks, A, B, C, D, E, F. These 2 socks came from the same pair. These 2 socks came from the same pair, and these 2 came from the same pair. Moreover, these 2 socks are indistinguishable from these 2 to vision, and these 2 are also indistinguishable. So you can't tell B and C apart by looking at them. You can't tell D and E apart by looking at them, but because of intransitivity, you can distinguish B and E. So you can't wear shoes with the sock B and the sock E because people will notice that you're wearing non-matching shoes. Now, this is not going to happen with only 6 shoes, but it can certainly happen with 50 socks. So now, suppose the following happens. Suppose all 6 socks have been washed and dried, and relying on matching, we pair together B and C, which match. We put together D and E, which also match. And now we are left with A and V, which do not match. So how do we deal with this problem? We relied on indiscriminability, which is not transitive. We could start over, but if there are a lot of socks, we might be working forever. Now, I asked a number of fairly senior computer scientists whether this problem was NP-complete. Nobody knew an answer. Then I asked Lakshmi. She was only a student at that time, although senior graduate student, and she showed in 2 days that the problem was in time and squared. So that was an impressive piece of work because I'd asked a lot of very famous people, is it NP complete? Is it not NP complete? They didn't know. Lakshmi showed it was in time and squared. Then there was a paper by Donald Knuth on the toilet paper problem. I won't go into the details of it, but that also is a kind of a problem about people using toilet papers, and it's a kind of real world problem. So I thought I would send our paper to Donald Knuth. But Donald Knuth does not read email. He does not read email. So the only way I could send him an email was to send it to Juan Pratt, who does read email, and ask Juan Pratt to convey the work to Donald Knuth. But Juan Pratt is a busybody, and he improved Lakshmi's algorithm. So the paper appeared with 3 names: Lakshmi Farida, myself, and Juan Pratt. Now, in alphabetical order, Farida comes before Parikh, and Parikh comes before Pratt. But Lakshmi said to me, she said, I don't want to deal with editors. I can't be bothered. I don't know why she said that, but maybe she was only a graduate student, is not experienced with the mechanics of publishing, and she left the job to me. So I said, all right, but if that is the case, then I'll put my name first. And she said, okay. So the paper appeared as Parikh, Parida, and Pratt because she didn't want to deal with editors. So I won't go into the details of her algorithm, and no, it's not difficult. So let's go into that. So there is a transitive relation J which depends on I, but does not coincide with it. So given a sock S, let MS be the set of those T which are indistinguishable from S, and let JST mean that MS equals MT. So S and T have the same indistinguishable socks. JST implies IST, but is stronger, and J is transitive. So relying on A, we construct J and pair two socks S and T if and only if JST. This algorithm runs in n squared time, showing that the original problem was not NP complete. So we need a theory of what happens when different agents interpret the same vague predicate in different ways. Many cooks making incompatible decisions can spoil a broth, but they could also come up with a good feast. Vagueness is not always a disaster. Obviously, it can't be because we use it all the time. Now consider the following situation. Country A moves some troops to its border with country B. If there is one soldier, we will not say A is massing troops. But if there are a million, we will. So A is massing troops on the border B with a vague statement and interpreted by different governments and different generals in different ways. And without going into politics, right? No politics, but just an example. So Putin has massed troops on the border. Now, what is Putin's intention? It's not clear, because normally if you're planning an attack, then you do this kind of a thing in a secret way. But Russia has made no attempt whatsoever to hide the fact that troops are being massed. And moreover, when Putin recently gave an address to the Russian parliament, he said nothing whatsoever about this massing of troops, but instead he talked about single women should have more payments. Single mothers should have more payments and such domestic issues. He said absolutely nothing about Ukraine. So the question is, what was the message he was sending? And was it a massing of troops or was it not? No one knows. Okay, now going back to the original example, in a survey of responses to a question distributed at a summer school for computer scientists in Assyria, Italy, June 1991. So this question was intended as a test for fuzzy logic. And the purpose was to find out how far Zade's fuzzy logic can serve as an adequate representation of a linguistic practice. And I told you that I sent this paper to Zade, and as usual, Zade was polite and nice. I mean, being was not Zade's time. So I was actually his guest in Berkeley, and even though I had not gone in Berkeley at his invitation, though my official host was Manuel Blum. Who now has, I think, is a Turing Award. So he was my official host. But Zade was, in a certain sense, the actual host. And Zade gave me $1,000 at the end of the semester, knowing very well that I was quite critical of fuzzy logic. So the students were asked 10 questions, were allowed to give a fuzzy answer, that is to say a real number in the range 0 to 1. And the responses 0 and 1 were also allowed. All the students knew English, but just for safety, Italian translations of certain words were provided. So the table should be read as follows. Column 1 is the question. L is the number of responses in the low range, 0 to 0.3. M is the number of responses in the middle range. And H is the number of responses in the high range. AVG is the average. C is the number of responses within 0.2 of the average, while D is the number of responses differing by more than 0.2. So this question 1, 5 people gave a low answer, 18 people gave a high answer. The average was 0.73, and only 9 out of 24 people were within 0.2 of the average. So you can see that the answers were all over the map. So here's an example. Is a mushroom a vegetable? There were 5 low answers, 1 medium answer, and 18 high answers. The average was 0.73. 9 people agreed with the average within 0.2, and 15 people disagreed. Now, to the 2 questions, is Henry Kissinger an American and is Sonia Gandhi an Indian? The patterns were different, even though the situations were exactly the same. I mean, Kissinger was not born in America, but became an American, and Sonia Gandhi was not born in India and became an Indian. And therefore, the answers should be same, but the answers were different because nobody thought Henry Kissinger was an American. And no one, 20 people thought that he was an American. Whereas with Sonia Gandhi, only 9 people thought that she was Indian. And it's because they were Italians, they were patriotic, and maybe many of them thought that Sonia Gandhi was still an Italian. So you can see that a statement like Sonia Gandhi is an Indian would not convey much meaning to a person in this group and to a person in that group. And similarly, is Henry Kissinger an American would not convey much meaning.
I have a doubt. One
Yes.
question, is Sonia Gandhi an Indian and is Sonia Gandhi an Italian were asked to same set of people?
Same what?
So were
same group of students. Yeah.
Because so this data is somewhat different in the sense that 9 people think that with high thing that it says an Indian, but only 7 people think that with low that says an Italian. So
right, whatever. But the point is, it was all at the same time. At the same time. There was an Italian woman who took notes of my lectures. I can't remember her name, but her notes are available on the internet. Her name was Zanabodi. She took notes of my lectures, and they were published in the little booklet. So we showed quite convincingly that vague predicts do not have a semantics, and hence they do not have a logic. But they do have a use. And we found how this falls inside Wittgenstein's requirement that a language can be useful and be useful. So here's a question I would raise for the future. Suppose that people's reactions to is it blue go according to experimental data, then they will have different semantics for blue, which will vary a little from person to person, and even from the same person to himself from time to time. Still, green means go and red means stop, even works, even though red and green are vague predicates. And let's see why. So since social algorithms make use of vague predicates, we need a programming language which incorporates utterances using such words and prove correctness of such algorithms. And it is clear that in those cases where the overlap between such uses of such words is great and differences are small, many algorithms will work. And of course, the extreme case is where a term is scientifically decided and scientists tell us how to use that word. And in that case, there will be no different sorts. In other words, all of us use the word electron in the same way, and all of us use the word galaxy in more or less the same way, which depend on scientists to tell us what a galaxy is. And so there is uniformity. But words like red, green, small, heap and so on and so forth, there is going to be a lot of variations. So supposing you have a programming language which will replace a condition, this vase is blue, by Usha says that this vase is blue. Some such algorithms will work and some will not work. So traffic signals work for the most part because mostly everyone regards a certain light as green and certain other light as red, so the behaviors are compatible. But of course, some people are colorblind. And colorblindness is more common among men. So David Mumford, whom some of you know, is colorblind. But the interesting thing is, for most of his life, he did not know that he was colorblind. Then there was an occasion when his brother was asked to pick up two things, let's say from a bunch of socks, which were of the same colors. Now Mumford knew that his brother was colorblind, and the brother picked two socks which were of different colors. And Mumford said, "Oh, I never thought you would pick two socks of the same color." So people realized that Mumford was also colorblind. So how does Mumford drive? And the reason is that red, green, and yellow lights are not placed in the same locations. So you can say the light at the top is green, the light at the bottom is red, the light at the light in the middle is yellow, and so you can drive without being colorblind, while being colorblind. But again, it's more common among men, and women tend to have better color vision. Also, it's known experimentally that when dreaming, women are more likely to dream in color, whereas men are more likely to dream in black and white. And I say proudly that even though I'm a man, I do dream in color. I mean, I dream in color when the color is important, right? So I remember a conversation with some woman whom I didn't know. I mean, this was in a dream. And I said to her, "I don't think this is real. It must be a dream." And she said, "Look behind you. Look at the blue sky." And then she said, "Such a brilliant blue sky could not appear in a dream." So what she said was, of course, false because it was a dream. But she was assuming that I was colorblind. Okay, so here are different shades of green. Green, chartreuse, juniper, sage, lime, fern, pear, moss, and so on, so on. And some of these colors are clearly different. I mean, nobody would confuse parakeet with moss. But if parakeet meant stop and shamrock meant go, there would be lots and lots of accidents, right? So the point is that red and green can be distinguished easily by most people, and in fact, by almost all people except those who are really colorblind. But parakeet and shamrock cannot be distinguished except perhaps by painters. So I would like to come up with a programming language for social algorithms which allows commands of this kind, where this vase is blue is replaced by Usha says that this vase is blue, and show that the algorithm is correct. And we can't say that the algorithm, let's suppose that we have, after her, we have Ravi says that this vase is purple, right? This has happened to many times. That I think in part the thing is that we Indians have words for colors, right? But our words do not necessarily correspond with the Western words. So when an American uses the word blue, we assume that he means blue as in the Indian sense, but the two don't correspond. And I've often found that something that I will call green, Americans will call blue. So I think the programming language, which works for social algorithms, where people communicate with each other, right? And then we figure out whether it's safe or whether this kind of differences will lead to problems. Okay, so thanks to Juliet Floyd, David Mumford, Paul Peterson, who is here, Gordon Plotkin, Juan Pratt, Ramanujam, Alan Stearns, and Reneke Fabricate. And a recent paper of mine, this was invited by Yuri Gurevich, who is Russian, Israeli, American. And he's brilliant. So he invited this paper, and so this paper was published. But before that, there were many other papers that I published on vagueness, and so here's a list of other papers. So Michael Dummett was a person who influenced me. Wang's Paradox, 1975. Kit Fine, Vagueness, Truth and Logic. There is Existence in Physical and Arithmetic, Test for Fuzzy Logic. This is the paper I sent Zadeh. Vagueness and Utility. This is the paper with Parikh and Pratt. This is Social Software. Timothy Williams wrote an impressive book on vagueness, which I have to confess I haven't read. Philosophical Investigation, Volpe in the Ultra-Intuitive Criticism, and this was published by Kino, Michael Investley, and Lotfi Zadeh. So these are some of the references, and I'm done. So thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for such an excellent and informative talk. Is there any question?
May I?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, of course.
Who? Purvita, who will? Myself or some students was there? Huh?
Yeah, you.
Okay. Rohit, yes. Thank you for this nice talk and many aspects you have covered. I only want to say that you definitely have not seen my work with Shoma.
Yeah.
On this varieties.
Yes.
Shoma
in France. Is she here also or not?
Sorry?
Shoma is not here.
Not here.
She's in Europe, right?
It is, yeah, it is a book.
Yeah.
So I would request you to see our approach towards varieties.
Right.
It only claims another approach. It doesn't say that it is the best one.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. And I also know that you are Purvita's teacher.
I will ask Shoma to send you the book.
Yes. But I'm surprised that you are teaching about fuzzy logic in India, because I feel that Indians are already fuzzy enough without your help.
Okay. Yeah.
Next question.
Yeah. So, yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah,
sure. Question. Yeah. You used the term you sort of have this program for a programming language, which will capture vagueness. And then you say, and you'll be able to prove the correctness of an algorithm in that language. Now, let's suppose we're in the 1930s and, you know, the fact that work was done late. I mean, suppose we were in the 1930s, what would you have said instead of programming language?
Well, I guess we would have relied on, but actually, I can answer you by relying on Turing.
Okay.
Who wrote this famous paper in 1936. Because Turing was asked why there is only a finite alphabet, right? A Turing machine has a finite number of states, finite alphabet, and a finite transition table, right? Turing was asked, and I think he actually discusses in that paper, why there is only a finite alphabet. And he said, if there are infinitely many, some of the symbols would be indistinguishable. So he anticipated the problem of vagueness. Brilliant remark, but he was brilliant in so many ways. By the way, I don't know if many people are aware of the fact that there is a sense in which Turing was Indian, because his father was a civil servant in India and his mother was in India when she got pregnant with Turing. And then she went to England to deliver the boy. And so he was born in England, but he was conceived in India, and he was conceived, in fact, in Andhra Pradesh. Bud Mishra often tells me that Turing is actually from Andhra Pradesh. I think he was conceived in Bhubaneswar. But that's a very good question. Thank you.
So
I had.
Yes, Ram.
Yeah. So there are all these algorithms, social networks, which use enormous amount of data from the net, harvest data, and really assign meanings based on some kind of crowdsourcing, right?
Right.
What do you say to that? I mean, those are, looking at use. I mean, they only look at use.
Yes.
Of course, they don't logicize it. They are neural networks. They just, in fact, it's very hard to explain what they do. In fact, the true correctness that you are looking for, I think it's almost impossible to do any of that. But they do serve a purpose and they are useful.
Yes, and that's why in that table, I gave both the average and the standard deviation, right, for certain questions. And therefore, if the standard deviation is very small, then we can safely use that word in communication and social algorithm. And if the standard deviation is big, then we should be careful.
Most of those algorithms do that kind of statistical inference. So.
Yes, right. So then, right. But then, for example, my daughter was tested positive for COVID, right? And both her mother, Carol, and I were extremely sad for a couple of days. But she didn't develop very strong symptoms. She did develop some. She had fever and a cough, but then she recovered and she's fine. So now we can ask the question: did she have COVID? And compare her to two of my colleagues at Brooklyn College, whom Ken McAloon knew, both of whom got COVID and died, right? So we can put them both in the same box, had COVID, right? But it's obviously a vague predicate, right? But nonetheless, social policy must rely on some mathematics, and mathematics always converts some vague data into some precise data, and therefore the results are sort of reliable. But there's nothing much we can do about it. I mean, the point is, had COVID is a vague expression, but there is not much we can do about it. Right?
Professor Parikh, can you take you back to philosophy and Wittgenstein?
Yes. Who is asking?
This is Amita Chatterjee from Kolkata.
I know who you are.
Yes, my question is that what is the moral of the story? By following Wittgenstein's language game, are you trying to say that Sorites paradox doesn't arise at all? Or are you saying that Sorites paradox arises, but it loses all its bite? What is your position?
The second. Wittgenstein cannot avoid the Sorites paradox, but he explains to you how you can work with it.
Right? Sorry, I missed your answer because one phone call came and I had to disconnect it. So will you please repeat it?
Well, you know that Wittgenstein actually did not believe in philosophy. I mean, he was certainly one of the most famous philosophers of the 20th century, and many people even think he was the greatest one, right? But at the same time, he himself, when young people asked him whether they should go into philosophy, Wittgenstein would advise them to do something else. And there is an interesting story about Wittgenstein trying to immigrate into the Soviet Union. I don't know how many people know this story, but Wittgenstein wanted to immigrate into the Soviet Union, But what he wanted to do was to immigrate as a laborer. And the Soviet Union wanted him to come as a philosopher, and they could not resolve his differences, and so he did not immigrate. Later on, when World War II broke out, Wittgenstein gave up his philosophy professorship at Cambridge and went and became an orderly in St. Guy's Hospital. So Wittgenstein had a rather low opinion of philosophy as an enterprise, but essentially one could say that the philosophical investigations are an attempt to destroy philosophy and replace it by common sense.
Yes, but you are a professor. What conclusion are you drawing from Wittgenstein's insight? That was my question.
Well,
whether you are saying that Wittgenstein's language game tells us that Sorites paradox doesn't arise at all, or Sorites paradox is completely without bite. It can be formulated, it arises, but it becomes biteless.
I don't know that he talks about it, but my guess is that he would like it. And let me refer you to a paper written by my friend Juliet Floyd. So Floyd's paper. Which appeared in a volume about my work, and Ramanujam was one of the editors. So what happened was that actually Floyd and I, she was a professor at City University before she went to Boston University, and she and I had a grant, a fairly large grant, $30,000 from the university. And one of the reasons we could have that grant was because we were at different colleges. I was at Brooklyn College and she was at City College. And moreover, I was technically a computer scientist and she was technically a philosopher. And therefore the university said, here are these two very different people collaborating, right? And so we'll give them $30,000. What the university didn't realize was that in some certain sense, we were the same person because we had very similar views and opinions. So she wrote this paper, Parikh and Wittgenstein, in which she explained something which I think was quite correct, which says that I did not seek to become a scholar on Wittgenstein. Instead, I sought to build on Wittgenstein. And so much of my work is not scholarship about Wittgenstein, but work which is clearly influenced by him. And then there was some local newspaper. He came to interview Juliet Floyd and I because of an article he was going to write about the two of us. And the title was Downloading Wittgenstein. So I will say that for a reporter, this was an impressive piece of insight because the Downloading Wittgenstein pointed clearly to the connection between Wittgenstein and computer science, right? And if you read the philosophical investigations with care, then you will realize that actually Wittgenstein anticipated computational complexity. And I'll give you an example. There is a rule which says from A and A implies B, you can infer B, right? Now, you can include that rule in your system, or you can use it as a derived rule, right? If it's used as a derived rule, then the proofs become longer. And if you use it just as another rule of inference, then the proofs become shorter. I think it's, I don't think it's I think it's something like this. X, A, X, A, B, from which you can infer X proves A, B. Ken, what is the name of this rule?
Importation, I think.
Deduction theorem.
Yeah, the deduction theorem. Right. The point is that this thing is not a rule of predicate logic as we commonly use it, because it has to be derived. And in each case where you make this inference, the proof is fairly longish. Right. Now, consider the system with this rule and consider the system without this rule. Now, this rule is conservative, so these two systems have the same set of theorems. However, the proofs without this rule are longer. And Wittgenstein said they are not the same system.
Is cut elimination implicit here?
I don't know. But as we know, Wittgenstein was not actually a very good logician because because there were many people who complained that Wittgenstein did not understand Gödel's theorem. And Floyd and Putnam defended Wittgenstein, but I think but I think that the critics of Wittgenstein was right, because I think Wittgenstein didn't quite know what Gödel had proved. But I mean, I think Wittgenstein just wasn't that good a technical logician, but he didn't have to be. And I think that this particular thing, you don't need to know technical logic. Then I think this is called the deduction theory, right?
Oh. Well, this could be the headline of the New Delhi Times tomorrow. I mean, Parikh disrespects Wittgenstein.
Right. No, he was a crackpot. And one last thing I can tell you, which is there's a certain picture of Wittgenstein and Hitler.
Oh, God.
I want to use Wittgenstein and W and Hitler went to the same school.
Ken, some technical remark. This is deduction theory, and the blow up of the proof is just 5 times its linear blow up. So when you go from the proof of the first thing, it's about 5 times with a very modest coefficient. And the question of cut elimination really depends on what systems you're working in, and usually it's not quite relevant.
Sergey, you're quite right. The thing is that when I first thought of this issue, I did not know that the blow up was not exponential. But later on, I think it's somebody in Spain who proved this.
I give it to my student. I give it to my students after the first lecture. So
okay, but you're quite right that it's only a linear speed up. So
linear with very small coefficients.
Yeah, but Wittgenstein and Hitler went to the same school, and now Wittgenstein insisted that people should not call him. What was his first name?
Ludwig, Adolf?
No, Wittgenstein's first name was what? The same.
Ludwig.
I mean, Ludwig. You should not call him Ludwig. Not Ludwig. That he should be called Herr Wittgenstein. Now, he was only a small boy, but he insisted on that. And Wittgenstein came from a very rich family. His father was one of the richest people in Europe. Also, Wittgenstein was half Jewish. His father was Jewish, his mother was not, right? Hitler, on the other hand, came from a very poor background, and I don't know how the two of them ended up in the same school. But we can imagine that Hitler was annoyed by this rich boy insisting on being called Herr Wittgenstein. But I asked Juliet about this, whether Hitler is clearly visible in the picture, and asked her whether it was Wittgenstein. And Juliet said, yes, it is definitely Ludwig. So the two of them not only went to the same school, but are in the same picture. And whether they interacted, nobody knows.
Wow. Wow, what an anecdote.
Right. Imagine being called Herr Wittgenstein. But Turing was also a crackpot, because Turing, apart from, I mean, he got into trouble with the British government because he was gay, but we don't consider there is anything odd about that. but he used to chain his coffee cup to a water pipe so that nobody else could use that cup. And I must say that not very many people do that. So a lot of crackpots can become brilliant. John Nash was also a crackpot. And I think Jayant Shah, who's still here, Nash has actually stayed in Jayant's house. So let me type these two names. Shah and John. And John Nash was the person who explained to me what the word Bombay means. He said it's a Portuguese expression meaning good bay. And it was the area was acquired by the British because a Portuguese princess married into the English royal family, and the area was a part of her dowry. And I don't like it to be called Bombay because it's a Portuguese word. And my rule is that when the Portuguese decide to rename Lisbon as Mumbai, then I will agree to call Mumbai Bombay. And until then, I'm going to call it Mumbai. The Portuguese have to extend their hand. Okay, so we've had enough stories, and if there are no more questions, then I will say thank you very much for inviting.
Okay. Thanks a lot for such a nice and informative talk, because I gained a lot of knowledge. I didn't know lots of stories for sure. Thanks a lot.
I'm sure that once you know about these, then some results will come. And maybe Mihir Chakravarti will decide that he too will think about vague language games.
Maybe, yeah, I'm not sure. Okay, so thanks a lot, everyone, for joining us, and thank you so much for accepting our invitation and giving such a nice talk.
Right. By the way, Eric Pakuit, who gave a talk earlier, he was a student of mine.
Oh yeah,
and And Ramanujam was in a certain sense also a student of mine, although not officially. He was in New York for a year and a half, and he took several courses at the City University of New York. But the immigration
including Professor Ken McAloon's.
Yeah, hi.
Yeah, I took Ken's course also. Okay.
Yeah, I thought I recognized you. Yes.
Well, many years ago.
Yes. I remember. As I remember, we'd rely on you for things that required a Brahmin point of view.
Right. I want to tell one more story about Tagore. As I said, my mother was a student at Santiniketan. And many years later, I gave a talk at Santiniketan. Then I realized that Tagore was a kind of a god in that town. And there was actually a museum devoted to him. Now, I knew Raymond Smullyan, that some of you may have heard of. Who taught both at City University and also at Indiana University. And I had been to Smullyan's house, met him. And then later on, I went to Santiniketan, and I noticed a certain similarity between the appearances of Tagore and Smullyan. So I bought a picture of Tagore, and the next time I went to see Smullyan, then I gave him that picture. And then yet another time, I went to see Smullyan, and then I saw that Tagore's picture was hanging on his wall. So I think Smullyan was pleased that this Nobel Prize winner and a distinguished poet, I don't know how much logic Tagore knew, but nonetheless, the two brilliant minds have something in common. And so it's nice that the two also look alike. And white beards, I mean, Ken's white beard reminded me of this story. Okay, so goodbye.